Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this webinar on privacy integration, integrating privacy compliance and privacy management into your ISO 27001 information security management system. In other words, tackling privacy and security simultaneously with a look at how EuroPrivacy Certification might also be one of the options that you pursue. I'm Alan Calder. I'm your host for today. My background is some 20 years in cybersecurity and privacy. I'm the founder of IT Governance. We are the single source for everything to do with IT governance, cybersecurity, and privacy compliance. I've written a bunch of books on both cybersecurity and on privacy over the years. I will be your host, as I said, for about the next 40 minutes as we talk through the range of issues in and around those specific topics. IT Governance as a business has some 20 years in the world of IT governance, providing IT governance, risk management and compliance solutions. We have a comprehensive GDPR and privacy products and service offering, a comprehensive ISO 27001 products and service offerings, and the group in which IT governance is the biggest part includes a number of other companies who provide additional specialist add-on services. We partner, as I hope you're aware, with Perry Johnson. Perry Johnson is one of the world's leading certification authorities, and the nature of the relationship between IT governance and Perry Johnson is that we are experts in implementing management systems such as ISO 27001 and ISO 27701. Perry Johnson is expert in certifying compliance of those kinds of management systems to those standards. It's an obvious requirement of certification bodies that they should be independent of any implementation advice and support. Otherwise, there's the risk of marking their own homework, and we're both firmly committed to the idea that assessment should be completely independent of the implementation the implementation of the management system against the standard. Perry Johnson has a very substantial operation in the US, as well as substantial operations in the UK, in the European Union. So they can handle certifications against a vast range of management systems, both nationally and internationally, just as IT governance can handle implementation projects across a wide range of cybersecurity and governance projects across a wide range of geographies. So enough about us as companies. We as a company, before I move on from it, we've done an awful lot of the GDPR privacy implementation stuff. The numbers kind of speak for themselves. We've dealt with organizations from very small to very large, and we've dealt with them across a very wide number of geographies and regions in the world. So this webinar draws on an awful lot of that experience and is designed to try and help you as you think about how you address the challenges of privacy and cybersecurity together. The webinar itself is going to look at the benefits of implementing ISO 27701 as a privacy extension to an information security management system, some of the key considerations to take into account when scoping your 27701 implementation project, some effective strategies for getting support from top management and getting the necessary budget and resources for the integration process, a brief look at the EuroPrivacy certification option, which is another way you can come at achieving the same objectives, and then practical steps and solutions to help organizations navigate the entire integration process. You will have noticed that you're all on mute. That's designed for us to try and reduce the amount of background noise and those kinds of challenges that there can be in a webinar of this nature, but we'd encourage you to ask questions. There is about 35 or 40 minutes of me talking through the data, the items we have on the agenda, and then there is between 10 and 20 minutes worth of time available for you. Questions. You will have noticed in the GoToWebinar dashboard that you have in front of you, there is a block there called questions. If you click on that, you can type a question in there, and you can type a question in there at any time during the webinar. Once we come to the Q&A section at the end of it, what we'll do is we'll pick out the questions. We'll share the question with you out loud, and then I'll answer the question, assuming that I'm able to do that, and then we'll move on to the next question. So don't hold back. As and when a question strikes you, put it into the question box and we'll deal with it. One of the most common questions tends to be, will the slides and recording be made available afterwards? Yes, it will be available to everybody registered on the webinar. Give us a couple of days to tidy everything up, but it will be available to everybody. So there you are. That's how quickly we can answer your questions. So let's move on to the first item on the agenda, the benefits of implementing ISO 27701 as a privacy extension to ISO 27001. And let's just look at that from the kind of general context point of view. Personal data is a prime target for cyber criminals because it's highly valuable on the black markets. And because personal data is so valuable, you can virtually think of every single cyber breach that takes place as also being probably a data breach. A data breach is certainly a cyber breach, and that's why all privacy compliance regulations and laws have a very clear set of requirements around information security or cyber security or data protection, described a number of different ways, but protecting personal data invariably involves a cybersecurity or information security management system, and dealing with an information security or cybersecurity breach deals with having to deal with a data breach and reporting it and managing it. Not always is it a data breach that involves personal data. There are other things that can happen, but almost always there will be a data breach component as well. When you look at some of the recent major breaches, the Alibaba data breach back in July last year, 1.1 billion users affected by that breach of what's admittedly a very substantial IT infrastructure, but 1.1 billion users hurt. The MoveIt hack, which began in May of 2023, is probably going to be one of the most extensive and successful attacks in history. So far, over 1,000 organizations and 60 million individuals impacted with critical personal information, including social security numbers, banking details, health records, and so on, all being exposed. Different quantities and types of data depending on which organization has been hacked by that particular breach. And so any sensible security team, senior management board in thinking about cybersecurity is also going to be thinking about how do we deal with protecting personal information. And if you've arrived at the idea that ISO 27001 is a good way of getting external verification, external assurance that the way you're dealing with protecting information, cybersecurity is effective, then the extension of ISO 27701 into your ISO 27001 environment is a completely logical and sensible step, because it enables you at one swoop to get a certification that deals with both sides of cybersecurity and data protection. It enables you to demonstrate conclusively there and then to anybody who's interested that you have taken appropriate best practice steps to protect personal data at the same time as building a comprehensive information security management system. So let's look a bit more at ISO 27701. Published in 2019, it's designed to be an extension to ISO 27001. It's a standard. You cannot get certification to ISO 27701 on its own. It can only be, you can only achieve certification by incorporating it into the scope of your 27001 management system. So, and you can do that either at the time of a 27001 implementation, or you can achieve 27001 and then come back and bolt the PIMS, the personal information management system, into it later. If you've not done 27001 yet, it makes sense, frankly, to do both of them simultaneously, and that means that you can have an assessment process and a certification process, which is looking simultaneously at at both of those management systems, generating a single certificate that will be valid. Both of the components will be valid right the way through for the full 3-year period. So ISO 27701 provides guidance for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving a personal privacy information management system. And it's based on the requirements, the control objectives, and the controls in ISO 27001. Remember, 27001 itself doesn't contain any controls. It has a list of controls in Annex A, which lists the controls in 27002. 27701 has a set of an additional privacy-specific requirements, controls, and control objectives, which when you implement it means that you extend the requirements in 27001 to include the PIMS requirements, and you put additional controls in place to make sure that you're able to meet the requirements of 27701. So how do they integrate? Well, they're from the same family of standards as a starter. So they're written deliberately to be integrated. They are built around the same logic. They're built around the same structure of management standards. They're built around exactly the same expectations around continual improvement cycles, plan, do, check, act, around the objectives of information security. So all of the things that you're dealing with as an ISO 27001 management system. 27701 simply says extend it to look at your privacy obligations and risks to personal data. Make sure that one of the objectives of your ISMS is the protection of personal data. Make sure that when you are identifying under clause 4 the requirements of interested parties, you're very specifically identifying the requirements of individuals, of organizations that provide you with personal data, and of privacy regulators around personal information in your clause 4 compliance documentation. So ISO 27001 requires you to take a risk-based approach to security. 27701 says, yep, absolutely right, extend it to cover the personally identifiable information or personal data that you are processing. And that means that when you get a certificate that has 27701 in its scope, you're giving to your stakeholders and your customers and all third parties a statement of assurance that you are meeting the requirements in respect of ISO 27701 and 001. Now, 27701 is not a jurisdictional or legally specific standard. It's designed, like 27001, to be agnostic of individual laws or of very specific sectoral or regional requirements. So one of the requirements of 27701 is that you identify the specific legal issues that you have to address in terms of protecting personally identifiable information. And that might be a data protection law across the EU, like GDPR, or in the UK, like UK GDPR, or there might be state-level laws across the US, like California Act or Nevada, or any one of the states that has a specific set of privacy laws. It's likely in the United States to include recognition that there are data breach incident reporting laws that are different for each of the states. All of those need to be specifically identified, and the specific legal requirements built into as detailed extensions of the generic requirements provided by 27701. So 27001 and 27701 give you non-specific but very appropriate, non-legally specific, but very appropriate to managing cybersecurity and managing personal information set of management processes and controls that you have to put the detail into by understanding the specific requirements of the jurisdictions that cover the areas in which you're going to be processing personal information, or PII. PII and personal data meaning basically exactly the same thing. So ISO 27701, its benefits are obvious. It's giving you a comprehensive privacy and information security management framework that enables you to, if you do the detailed work properly, demonstrate genuine legal and regulatory compliance around privacy and privacy management. It gives you a framework and a certificate that you can use to demonstrate to third parties and stakeholders that you have tackled privacy alongside cybersecurity, that you've reduced risk to them and therefore to you and therefore to them. It enables you to drive efficiencies through your management systems. It will, as you work through putting ISO 27701 in place, you will identify ways to improve your processing of data, where you store data, your data retention policies. Because 27701 has specific controls around all of those areas, you will be driven to look at the specific things you need to do to legally, in your chosen jurisdictions, implement controls within the 27701 context. A certificate and a standardized framework means that you can reduce the requirement for customer audits and regulatory audits. That can enable you to simply produce a certificate of compliance, and that independent assurance has wide-reaching benefits, including in cases where you might have a data breach and there's a question as to whether or not you took appropriate steps to protect personal information. You can go, yeah, we did, and here's our certificate that demonstrates we didn't look at, we took it out a year ago, and we've been subject to ongoing surveillance visits, which means we've gone on doing exactly what we were supposed to have been doing. So if you're thinking about 27701, you've got to think about it in the context of each of the clauses in ISO 27701. So ignoring 1, 2, and 3, those are not clauses you have to comply with, but in 27001, it's clauses 4 through 10 that you have to comply with. So you've got 7 specific sets of requirements which you need to, following the guidance of 27701, extend to include the PIMS elements in 27701. So in clause 4, you're going to be looking at specifically which legal requirements apply to you, what are the requirements around legality of processing, of retention, etc. In clause 5, which is the setting of creating roles and measures to implement and monitor what you're doing, that will extend to include understanding of your legal requirements around and contractual requirements about managing personal information in line with business objectives. Clause 6 is what are you doing, how do you, when you do the risk assessment, you've got to look at risks not only to the organization for in terms of breaches, but you've got to look at risks now to individuals, to the persons whose data you're processing, and that's going to have a slightly different risk scale. So, you know, when you look at risk to the organization, you might say the organization's risk appetite is we can live with on a level of 1 through 5, where 5 is very serious and 1 is minor. We'll live with exposure up to, say, level 2, because we as an organization can cope. We've got enough resilience to cope with that kind of risk, and we don't want to spend the money. When you're looking at risk to individuals whose data you're processing, of course, you've got to look at it from their perspective, not yours. So you're looking at their risk. You might be saying, well, actually, where they're concerned, if we have a 1 to 5 risk scale, we maybe should accept no risk, or we should accept a level of risk which is 1 only, and we've got to look at how we protect them, because it's their data we're processing, and the impact of the breach, yes, we feel the impact because we have regulatory exposures, but they too have an impact because it's their data which is compromised. And for individuals to feel an assurance, get an assurance from the fact that you've got a 27701 component to your management system, they need to know that you've taken appropriate steps to think about the impact on them of a data breach. Clause 7 is about resourcing the right people, the right competences, the right capabilities through the organization. Clause 8 is the execution of the selected controls, making sure that the controls you've selected and your risk treatment plans extended to deal with the additional controls that come from ISO 27701. And then 9 and 10 are monitoring the effectiveness of the controls and looking for continual improvements. Remember, when you're looking for continual improvement, you're looking for how does the management system reduce the risk for the organization. That's 27001. But 27701 is how does it reduce risk for the individuals whose data we are processing. So 27001 becomes a slightly more two-directional standard because of 27701, but it's the same standard. You're not operating multiple standards in different silos. It's a single integrated approach to cyber risk and risk to PII in the same envelope. So, of course, the step of integrating 27701 and 27001 goes through ISO 27002, and both 001 and 002 have just been updated to, they were published in 2022. There's a transition that gives you until 2025, until the end of October 2025 to transition to compliance with the new standard. If you are, as you probably are, looking at how you implement 27701 in the context of a 27001 colon 2022 standard, how do you do that given that 27701 is the 2019 version? Well, it's not that difficult really, because the 27701 standard is going through the update process. The update draft was published early January 23. There's several stages to go through before it's completed. So we'll see a new version of it, which is specifically aligned with the 2022 standards, appearing sometime in the next 4 to 6 months, hopefully. But you can get started right away, because 27002 2022 in its annex very specifically links the 2013 and the 2022 control sets. The 2019 version of ISO 27701 is specifically linked to the 2013 controls in 27002. Way too many numbers here, I know. And that means that it's very easy to link 27701 to the 2022 version of the two new standards. It's very straightforward to do. You can get on with putting together a project and making the planning, carrying out the implementation. When the updated version is published, the number of changes you have to make are likely to be very minor to make sure that you've aligned with what will be probably 27701 colon 2023. So don't delay, get on with it right now. The benefits of getting started and moving the projects along, given that projects can take between 3 and 12 months between small and mid-sized organizations, there's not a good reason to hold back. So that's the benefits and overall approach. What are the key considerations to take into account when scoping the project? Well, start with senior management. Senior management needs to buy into the benefits of implementing 27701 in conjunction with 27001. They need to see that there's a genuine benefit in managing personal data, PII, in the same management system, in the same framework of processes, in the same set of responsibilities as you're managing overall information security. That should enable you then to say, fine, given management's buy-in, let's have a look at where we're processing personal data. So you need to have a look at where personal data comes into the organization and where it goes out. And that's a requirement of GDPR, for instance. GDPR requires that you know how data comes into the organization, where it goes out. Any good management system in looking at information is going to look at information coming in and where it goes out. So it's looking specifically at personal data. And so you might say, we need to look at information coming in through the recruitment process. That's clearly a way in which we gather personal data. We need to look at information coming into the organization through customer contact. Depending on your industry, you might collect a lot of personal data about your customers in order to provide services to them. Might be limited data, but you need to be clear about what the data is, how you're capturing it, where you're processing it, what the legal basis of processing that data is, where you store it, who else you share it with. Are there any third parties who process the data on your behalf, or with whom you share the data? So you need to look at the mapping of personal data in order to make sure that the scope of your management system is going to be complete. Remembering that 27001 is looking really at everything which is in the control of management, and you're going to look at processes that are outside the control of management and deal with them separately. But the same thing applies. Those processes, your mapping needs to take account of not just processing of information, but processing very specifically of PII, of personal data. Once you've identified what data you're processing, you can look at the risks of breach. You can look at where the breaches might occur. You can look at the appropriateness of the processing. One way of dealing with exposures is to limit the amount of data you collect. So for organizations looking at 27701 who haven't done a lot of work around compliance, quite often one of the benefits that comes is you identify that you're collecting personal data or you're storing personal data. You really don't need to or shouldn't be processing or storing, and so you can get rid of it. You can simplify processes, and so the scoping exercise can lead to savings in your operation and improvements in efficiencies inside the organization. So focusing then on, we know what we're processing, we know where we're processing it. You think about vulnerabilities, you think about what are the security controls we need to put in place around the personal data. Remembering always that one of the controls is deleting it, is eliminating it. Of course, you need to delete it securely, and you can't just sell a hard drive or a USB stick. You need to think about how you delete data. You need to think about how you share data. Is it encrypted? And you need to think about data on personal devices as well. So the scoping activity is fairly complex, but once you've identified where personal data is being processed, you build it into your overall approach to ISO 27001 implementation. You look at then industry best practice around processing personal data. You look at the regulatory requirements around processing personal data. You make sure that what you're doing meets those requirements. You've identified how you have to get the agreement to the data subject to process the data. You look at the responsibilities of senior management in that, and you build on that to drive security focus around the processing of PII within your broader information security management system. So what do? You carry out a gap analysis. You identify against the requirements of the combined 27701 and 27001 what controls you have in place. You first of all, you do the mapping, you make sure you know where you're processing personal data, you make sure you know what the scope of your management system is likely to be, and then you do a gap analysis within that scope. Where are the areas we comply or where we don't comply with the requirements of the two standards? Mostly organizations will do them in two passes. You'll do a 27001 gap analysis followed by a 27701 gap analysis, simply because you don't have an integrated gap analysis tool. You'll look at them one after another. And in looking at and identifying the gaps create your implementation plan. What do we need to do to become compliant? Most organizations are already doing a number of the things they should be doing to become 27001 or 27701 compliant. So you just need to find out, it's not as though you're starting from scratch. What you're doing is finding out what you're not doing so you can build out a plan to tackle those non-compliances, to tackle the vulnerabilities in your security framework, and get yourself compliant. You identified the applicable legal and contractual requirements. There may be contractual requirements that are very specific about how you look after data, or who can see the data, or when it has to be deleted. You make sure those, are built into your processes. And then you make sure that you're clear about which business units have what applicabilities, or applicable in what way to the processing of data, who's going to have what specific responsibilities around data. And you can then define what the timeline might be for the implementation of ISO 27001, because you know what training you need to do in which parts of the organization, you know what changes you need to make to some of your existing practices in order to bring them in line with legal, regulatory, or contractual requirements. And you can build out a timeline that identifies who's going to do what by when. You can also obviously identify what skills and competences that you need. So obviously you need to do this. You need to get key stakeholders to buy in. Senior management is the starting point, but you're going to need to have a number of other key stakeholders bought into the project as well. HR is one obvious team inside the organization. Your compliance team, who are going to have to process data, IT, who collect data, sales and marketing, who collect and are responsible for huge amounts of data. They're all going to have to buy in to the project, because they're all going to have to identify what data they're protecting or processing. They're going to have to be part of identifying flows and committing to the approach that as an organization you want to take to privacy, and committing to making sure that they update their processes to deal with PII alongside everything else, and that they have appropriate buy-in from their own teams and their own organization to do what you now require them to do. You need to look at stakeholders. There may be stakeholders, customers or suppliers who are involved in providing you information or processing information from them. You may need to leverage their capabilities and expertise in order to build the processes that you need in order to have a secure management system that processes personal data and all the rest of the information in a way that assures integrity, but also ensures that those who need to access the data can do so as and when they need to. Remember, ISO 27001 is about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It's not just about confidentiality. It's about a balance between those three elements. So in looking at the control mappings, there is also in the ISO family 29100. So this is kind of useful when you're beginning to look at privacy frameworks. It's not 29100 and 29151 are codes of practice. They can provide useful additional information. They can't be part of your scope, your 27001 scope, but you might turn to them for additional input from ISO on dealing with privacy management frameworks or managing personally identifiable information. One of the standards that does implement, that is capable of being implemented into your ISO 27001 management system alongside 27701 is ISO IEC 27018 and ISO IEC 27017. These are management standards that relate specifically to protecting PII in public clouds for organizations who are acting as PII processors and protecting information for essentially e-commerce organizations, that 2717, who are operating in the cloud. So you may find it sensible, this webinar is not going to spend any time on them, but you may find it sensible in scoping out your management system to look at 27017 and 27018 as possibly one or two other standards to include in the scope of your ISO 27001 management system. So, turning to how you go about getting top management and budget support to that. To a large extent, I'm going to cover grounds I've covered. The benefits of being able to demonstrate that you have implemented a best practice approach to managing personally identifiable information is about as obvious as the benefits of demonstrating you've implemented best practice approaches to managing cybersecurity as the organization. The reality is you have to get certification, be able to demonstrate that you do have senior management support. So in a way, being able to say to senior management, you like the idea, but you actually have to support it because it says so in the standard. And the assessor will want to see what you have done. They'll want to know that you set a personal example. They'll want to know how you've been involved in messaging to the organization. And for them, that's a vital component. It's also a vital component of the project because senior management will be able to make sure that individual departments understand they've got to commit. Senior management will be able to commit resources, money, all of the things that implement the management system you are going to need. Remember, implementing a management system is not for free. You're trying to save yourself maybe millions of dollars or pounds in damages, so spending tens of thousands or pounds or dollars in terms of getting yourself compliant is a sensible investment. But getting management support to make that happen, maybe making compliance part of individual objectives. Those are logical ways that management can help drive forward the implementation. Certainly, management support is a key part of getting buy-in from stakeholders, customers, suppliers, and it sets the tone for a culture of security awareness and accountability right the way through the organization. It drives up the likelihood of a successful implementation and of long-term compliance. We know from the thousands of organizations we've worked with that where top management is genuinely involved, rather than just paying lip service, but genuinely involved, the project moves much more quickly, it lasts much longer, it becomes a fundamental part of how well the organization operates, such that come the 3-year recertification process, it's a very straightforward exercise. It's not a big job to do because it's become embedded in how the organization operates. So 27701 enables you to, if you're trading into the European Union, either a EU-based organization processing the data of EU residents, or you're in the UK or in the US providing services into the European Union, they're required to comply with EU GDPR, or you're in the UK or providing service into the UK and therefore required to comply with UK GDPR, which is still essentially the same thing. ISO 27701 enables you to demonstrate that you've met the requirements around data protection in relation to personal data under GDPR. Article 42 of GDPR goes further than that and says that there will be data protection certification mechanisms in the form of seals and marks to demonstrate that you've taken steps to meet the compliance requirements. So 27701 implemented as part of 27001 is one logical way that you can demonstrate that you're meeting EU and or UK GDPR requirements. Here's my certificate. I've got a PIMS, I've got an ISMS, I am compliant. In order to be compliant, I've had to understand the legal requirements and demonstrate how I'm going about meeting those requirements. So information security system, privacy management integration leads you to a bind, as long as you've got management commitment, you've built a design, designed, built and implemented a combined PIMS and ISMS that meets the requirements of customers and all stakeholders, delivering continual improvement, and your internal audit. And here, one of the benefits of doing this together is you can audit a process for both ISMS and PIMS compliance at the same time. You can train your internal audit teams, you can train your lead audit team to do combined audits, reduce disruption, get much better process flow, much better efficiencies inside the organization. All that can lead into combined integrated stage 1 and stage 2 certification audits by your accredited certification body. So the benefit of doing 27701 inside 27001 at the same time, either because you're doing it for the first time or because you have a recertification audit coming up, or you've got a transition audit coming up, those are the audits into which you should build 27701, because you can have it done as a combined piece of work. Stage 1, that's the documentation review. Stage 2, the on-site audit carried out by your accredited certification body, leading to a single certificate and a single program of continual assessment visits, the checkups that take place annually or biannually, depending on what you agree with your certification body. So real practical operating benefits from tackling 27001 and 27701 simultaneously. But there is another way, there is another way you can go about demonstrating you meet specifically GDPR requirements at the moment. Now, this is the EuroPrivacy Seal. It's a new framework developed in the European Union. It's developed by the European Research Programme, co-funded by the European Commission itself, and it's a certification scheme. It enables organizations to demonstrate that their data processing activities specifically meet the requirements of EU GDPR. There are extensions either available or coming available that will enable you to demonstrate you specifically meet the requirements of UK GDPR or of PIPEDA or of other national jurisdictions. But it's got very specific requirements that you have to carry out. So it's a set of specifications, a bit more like PCI than ISO 27001. And it is also at this time only, anyway, available only to organizations that have to appoint DPO. So not every organization can get EuroPrivacy certification. If you're required to appoint a DPO because of the volumes of data you're processing or the environment in which you're processing it, then you're eligible to become a EuroPrivacy certified organization. EuroPrivacy as a certification enables you to demonstrate conclusively that you meet the requirements of GDPR. So it's a logical thing to do for organizations who are thinking about how do we demonstrate, how do we remove some of the challenge we get from compliance in the EU, our partners continually wanting to audit what we do as well. We go, here's my EuroPrivacy certification. Now, it's designed for both data controllers and data processors to formally certify their data processing activities. Certification is by definition recognized in all 27 EU member states, will be taken into account by data protection authorities in case of litigation. And the core criteria in the EuroPrivacy GDPR, and you can read about this on the EuroPrivacy website, you've got to meet those requirements. And the requirements are very specific around, and I've listed them in bullet points: lawfulness of data processing, special data processing, data subject rights, controllers' responsibilities, member transfers of personal data to third countries or international organizations. All of those you have to be you have to comply very specifically with those, and the audit will be very detailed in looking at how you comply with those. The EuroPrivacy certification does not require you to go and do a separate set of activities around ISO 27000, around information security. If you have ISO 27001 certification, then the EuroPrivacy certification program says, fine, then you are doing what you need to be doing around information security management. So logically, if you've done ISO 27001 with 27701, it's a very straightforward step for you to step up to a EuroPrivacy certification, assuming that you are an organization that needs to have a data processing officer, a DPO. So EuroPrivacy is not an organization, it's a higher level of rigor, if you like, for organizations that have 27001 and 27701. It's a even more conclusive certification than 27001, 27701. It's really worth pursuing from that point of view. And the logic for implementing it is very similar to 27701, just it gives you a higher level of compliance. It's very specifically GDPR focused. As I said, there are extensions coming available that enable you to go, and we can demonstrate we've met the specific requirements in the UK or in Canada, or as each of the certificates become available. Reduces your exposure not only to breaches, but also to penalties arising from breaches. You can build customer trust, and customer trust around personal data processing is going to become a bigger and bigger issue. More than best practice, it evidences actual legal compliance. Rigorous supply chain assurance, rigorous demonstration to customers means that you can grow your business effectively. Very specific, very useful, logical way to extend your compliance activity. And in terms of meeting your compliance requirements, of course, you're going to get certification, and the same certification body that certifies ISO 27001, 27701 should be able to certify EuroPrivacy. The EuroPrivacy framework is structured exactly like the ISO standards. It has independent certification bodies operating in an accredited framework, and the certification bodies go through an accreditation process. So if you go to the EuroPrivacy site, you can find out which CBs are now accredited to do EuroPrivacy certifications, assuming that you're eligible to do it. But you could then logically, if you're doing EuroPrivacy on top of 27701 and 27001, look to do all three certifications simultaneously with the same organization. Now, managing compliance for 27001, 27701, particularly if you add 17 and 18, you add the broadening range of general legal requirements, it gets to be more and more complicated. And frankly, the only way you can genuinely manage your growing range of challenges is with a management platform like CyberComply. CyberComply is an automated tool which is designed to provide a seriously compliant ISO 27001 risk assessment. So it draws on 20 years worth of doing ISO 27001 risk assessments that consistently meet the requirements of certification bodies, produces a statement of applicability, a risk treatment plan, statement of applicability which can draw on now something like 25 or 30 different standards. If your SOA needs to integrate 701 or 17 or 18, it can do that. It can produce a risk treatment plan that draws on Annex A or whatever other frameworks you need to in a very straightforward way. It streamlines incident tracking and collaboration, and being able to report incidents and track how you report incidents is a requirement in 27,000 in GDPR, in EuroPrivacy, in the new SEC regulations. It enables you to do it all in real time, and it has a dashboard that enables management to see what's going on. So CyberComply, you can find out more by clicking on the link or going to Vigilant Software, is a platform which is designed, it's got a huge roadmap of additional functionality coming available in the years ahead, but it's designed to enable organizations to simplify setting up and managing a management system. More painful to do initially than doing it all off the bat, but from a maintenance, rigor, robustness, resilience point of view, completely unbeatable. So turning now to the kinds of solutions available through IT governance, of course, there's EuroPrivacy. We are a certified partner of the European Centre of Certification and Privacy. You can read about that on the EuroPrivacy website. So all of our skills around the various certifications, particularly GDPR specific, and the suite of services that we've launched around EuroPrivacy, you can draw on for a gap assessment and so on around EuroPrivacy. We can help around ISO 27001, so lead implementer, lead auditor, ISO 27001 or ISO 27701 gap analysis. We can do lead implementer and lead auditor for 2701, 27701. All of that is just as straightforward. And of course, we can, where organizations want us to, implement the management standard rather than just providing support. Because we're not certifying, we can do all of the work. And we do this for 27001, we do it for 27701, we do it for organizations nationally and internationally. So we can help in whatever way you would want us to. And of course, having done that, you need to be talking to a certification body, and we would typically be encouraging you to agree with a certification body like Perry Johnson early on in the project, what your timetable looks like around getting your certification done and done appropriately. You can access IT governance through any one of our 3 websites, UK, Europe, or US. We are in a position to provide whatever services you need. All of that stuff you can access, and or you can just simply respond around this webinar that you want more information, and we'll make sure we come back to you. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of what I was planning to say, and I'm going to lubricate my voice and begin answering questions. If you have questions that you haven't yet asked, please, in the Q&A components of your GoToWebinar dashboard, there is a question function. If you open that, you can type a question in there. My colleague will pick up the questions, read them out, and then I will attempt to. So here we go. We're on to questions and answers.
Okay, I've already have a few questions here. The first 2 are actually about if we're going to share this presentation afterwards, and this will be available on the Perry Johnson website. I'll forward it over to you, Alan, as well, if you would like to send that out or publish it. But the presentation will be shared. The next question is if you could please shed light on what the trend is on the adoption of 27701 since 2019.
Sure. So the trend is very much like what we see with most standards. We go through the very traditional uptake phase of innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority. I would say we're currently round about the gap between innovators and early adopters. So those organizations who see immediately, or who saw immediately, the commercial, competitive, and assurance benefits of 27701 got on with it. We've had 27701, for instance, in our management system scope for a number of years now. And there are a growing number of organizations who recognize that it's a sensible thing to do. But the number of organizations is tiny, so it's still a huge advantage for innovators, early adopters who see the competitive and stakeholder advantage in pursuing it. 4 or 5 years down the track, with the escalating level of regulatory requirements around processing of personal data, I expect to see it become very widespread, very common, very standard for organizations to want to be able to demonstrate they're taking genuine, sensible best practice steps to meet their obligations. The reality is that you might get away with a small fine the first time round you have a breach. It'll go up the second time, and cyber criminals go, if you've had a breach, we'll come back because we know that you're weak, and we'll have another go. So we see, we're early stages, we see substantial growth ahead.
Okay, the next question is there an ISO 27701 certification as a standalone standard, or must it always be seen as an extension of 27001?
You cannot implement it on its own. It can only be implemented within the context or as part of the scope of ISO 27001.
Okay, another similar question. Can you add 27701 to an existing 27001 certification through a surveillance audit, or only a certification or recertification audit?
That depends entirely on the arrangements you make with your certification body. You can certainly, I would certainly expect that they will agree to you adding it when you do if you're upgrading from 27001 2013 to 2022, I certainly would expect they would allow you to include it in that upgrade audit. Most certification bodies, I would expect, if you've pre-planned it, will agree to you having a bit of extra time allocated to your continuing assessment visit to deal with adding 27701 to the scope. That's again how we did it when we did it. We added it into one of our CAVs. We spent an extra day or 2 days, I don't remember, on that, and that meant that we then got a new certificate issued following the CAV, but it included 27701. So it's a commercial discussion. Have a discussion directly with your CAV. Say, we want to do this. How quickly, how easy can you make it for us to do that?
Okay, and the last question that we have here is, should we transition to 27001 2022 before adding 27701 in practical terms?
So it depends on the complexity of your organization and of your management system. In 9 cases out of 10, we would recommend making the transition and integrating 27701 simultaneously, because what you're doing in the transition is changing your controls, dating the controls, and you're making some changes to your management system. No organization enjoys change. Making one set of changes today and then coming back in 6 months later to make another set of changes to integrate 27701 is painful. You'll get more resistance that way. So what I would recommend you do is you make the transition once. You put together your 27001 transition to the 2022 version of the standard. You map out the additional changes you need to the management system to include the PIMs. You look at the additional changes you need to make in the way of controls to include 27701, and then you make sure that your transition audit also includes adding 27701. So in one leap, you get the benefit of a single audit visit, and from then on you have a single integrated CAV, and from then on you're doing single integrated internal audits with a single integrated internal audit program. So I would unquestionably, unless you have a very complicated information security management system, I would 9 cases out of 10 recommend doing them simultaneously. If it is so integrated, so complex that you're concerned about it, give us a shout. We can talk to you about ways in which you might be able to address it. Hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, well, that's all the questions that we have here. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Very good. In that case, ladies and gentlemen, if we've dealt with all of your questions, I'd like to thank you all for being on the webinar. If you have any other questions that you would like to raise, please do email them into us. We'll pick them up and follow up. But thank you all for being with us. Please do remember this is part of an ongoing series of webinars around ISO 27001 and 27701 and cybersecurity generally. And please do log on to either the Perry Johnson or the IT Governance website. We look forward to you joining us on a future webinar. Good luck with both ISMS and PIMS. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.